Hi there, welcome to Floating in Dreams. Today's video is going to be a tea time chat where we discuss why indie makeup isn't always better. Welcome to everybody watching today. If you are here for eyeshadow palettes, essence and couture reviews, and getting the use out of your makeup, then join the family because that's what this channel is all about. And once a month, I like to come on here to chat about something makeup related, something that's going on in the industry or something that I pick up on what people have left comments on. And today I wanted to discuss about, indie brands being very hyped up and why, that's a great thing because indie brands definitely have something different to offer to us, but also why I think some people might sometimes feel a little bit let down when they start trying indie brands. So that's definitely what I want to unpack in this video. And in case you're unfamiliar with my content, then it may be good to know that I have fair skin with a cool to neutral undertone, which greatly skews my makeup preferences. And because I have been buying, trying, and reviewing makeup for more than a decade, I have some very strong preferences as well. So if you'd like to join the Snow Angel family, then definitely click subscribe down below. And then let's just get to unpacking this tea time chat. So yeah, before we get to the actual topic, I'm a really bad YouTuber because I had kind of envisioned this series as being me having a cup of tea with you, like friends. And now I forgot to make myself a cup of tea before sitting down to film the video. So yeah, I have to film a little bit in advance for this month. So I was filming other videos and I just completely forgot. So bear with me as we're going along, and please be kind in the comments as well. I just want to come on here and say that first up. Because so far it's been going really well, I think. So yeah, you've been leaving some really good feedback and comments on this on these types of videos for sure. So yeah, in today's video, I wanted to discuss why indie makeup isn't always better than like a more established brand, you could say. So I have seen quite a few comments over on this channel, but also on other channels. And I think Angelica Newqvist also touched upon this topic in one of her more recent videos, where people are sometimes saying how they are disappointed when they try indie brands, and that they have tried makeup from different indie brands, and yet they feel they are always getting the same thing, and that they don't feel it's unique enough, or that it doesn't warrant the price point, etc. etc. And that's what I want to sort of unpack in today's video, is why, if you are looking into buying from indie brands, or maybe you've already done this in the past and you felt a bit disappointed with what you ended up receiving, or maybe you're afraid you're gonna be disappointed what you will be receiving, why that may be the case. So before we get, so I have a couple of topics I want to talk about. So I'm going to be making sure to cut the video into chapters so you can watch whatever part you'd like, but we're going to have to talk about what an indie brand actually is, so establishing some definitions again. Then we're going to talk about why I think indie brands are so loved and hyped up in the makeup community. Then I also want to talk about why indie brands aren't always great, or what they may not be the best at. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about the limitations of shopping from indie brands, and sort of like my tips and tricks or things that I like to bear in mind whenever I decide to shop from an indie brand, and how I sort of decide what to go for and what I don't buy. And to hopefully help you that way to also make perhaps better decisions for you. So yeah, first topic here, what is an indie brand? So indie stands for independent. It's like indie music is independent music, meaning not supported by a major record label, but either a smaller label or maybe something that's published, released by the artist themselves. So that's also what indie makeup is. That's where the name sort of comes from. It's very often a small business where one or two people are running the show. They are not part of a bigger beauty company. They're not part of L'Oreal. They're not part of Estee Lauder. They're not part of Condé Nast. That's also a beauty one, I believe. Like, they're just not bought up by these bigger name companies that, for instance, an Urban Decay and a Too Faced are part of. And Urban Decay and Too Faced used to be indie brands. These are brands that used to be made in someone's kitchen at home. They turned it into a professional business, and then later on the business was bought by one of these bigger name companies. So within the makeup industry, you just have very many different ways of running your business, and one of the things you can do is to choose to go it your own and do everything yourself pretty much. So indie brands doesn't, again, like when I talked about like products being cruelty free, the name indie just refers to a small business that is owned by maybe 1 or 2 people and that don't have a lot of employees. That's usually what an indie brand is. And within indie brands, it's very much about ownership. It's very much about who owns the brand when something is dubbed an indie brand. It's not even about how many employees they have. It's not, and this is what we're going to touch upon in a minute, it's not about who creates the products. And it's not about like numbers or units that they sell. Indie doesn't necessarily mean it's small. Usually it is. Very often it is, but it doesn't have to be. So indie brands is just any brand that's not owned by a bigger company. That's like the actual thing it means. However, because a lot of indie brands start by one person with very perhaps, you know, limited stock, and you know, they're making it in their kitchen quite literally. Since that is the idea I think we have of what an indie brand is, I think that that's where some of the expectations of consumers don't always line up with what indie brands actually are or can be, and they can still be indie brands. So you can be an indie brand and not make your own makeup. You can buy it from somewhere else and still be an indie brand because the brand itself is owned by just one person that is not affiliated to a very large company. So that's why I think, thinking of that definition, indie brand as being just independently owned, and leave it at that, then I think we have what we need to work with when it comes to why indie brands are loved, but also why indie brands nowadays can feel a little underwhelming to some people. I'm not saying that I feel underwhelmed with them, but that this is what I've noticed in my comments, that some people say like, I don't get the hype. Why are these indie brands so hyped up? So that's my segue into the next topic, which is why are indie brands so loved and why are they so hyped up? I think there are a couple of things that factor into this. So a lot of indie brands, because they are smaller and they produce smaller batches usually, and if they figure out their niche target audience very well, they can really make products for that one niche customer. Meaning that they can make products that other major brands may never sell. So if you've watched the beauty space for a while, you will have seen that multi-chrome shimmer formulas are now everywhere. And that's not a sudden thing. That's something that started in the indie makeup scene, and that's now trickling into the mainstream. So getting these multi-chrome like flippy shades is definitely something, an innovation that gets started in indie brands, and then you have brands who are really able to, you know, expand on that and come up with different formulas. Cliona comes to mind here. And then you see that other brands start copying it, and when this starts to happen enough, then some of the major brands start to go like, hey, what is going on there? And then they try to make their version of it. So then you get Natasha Denona putting a multi-chrome in the My Dream palette. And you get people like Pat McGrath and Danessa Myricks who put these kind of flippy shades in like almost every single palette. So indie brands can definitely be the instigator of innovation within the makeup industry, whether it's color stories or color products or types of products or things that go with very certain makeup techniques. I think that, for instance, years ago, it was, you know, when highlighter was all the rage, the Bitterlace Beauty unicorn highlighter that was duped by Makeup Revolution in a heartbeat. That was an indie brand that came up with this rainbow highlighter, and all of a sudden we got nothing but rainbow highlighter everywhere. That's something that got started by an indie brand and that was then sort of pushed. So I think that indie brands are very important for, especially if you appreciate makeup from the more creative perspective. Indie brands is where you're gonna find, you know, the black matte liquid lipstick before any other brand does it. So they are the ones that very often do things first. And because they do things first, they get quite a lot of credit for that. And that's where, you know, some people, also influencers, sort of make it their, almost their persona, their identity to be the one person who only ever talks about indie brands. And that's why they get hyped up as well. Because indie brands are smaller brands, they are sometimes also easier to get a collab with if you are a smaller creator. A brand like Urban Decay, Tarte, Too Faced, Charlotte Tilbury, they're not going to work with someone who only has a couple of thousand followers. However, if you have a smaller brand and you can find them when they are also trying to grow their brand and you are trying to grow as a creator, you can kind of team up and sort of, you know, have the best of both worlds. So you see that happening with some of the creators that are also a little bit bigger right now, that really got started talking a lot about smaller indie brands. They're the ones who are still talking about those brands. The brands have grown, they have grown, and their audience is growing with them. So this is why you are getting some channels and some creators who keep talking about these things, because it's just a great way to get an in, to get PR, to get free product, to get collabs, to get your own palette made with them, or maybe to curate something. A lot of brands actually get started like that. A brand like ColourPop teamed up with Kathleen Lights quite early on and really were able to bank on her audience to grow as a brand as well. So a lot of indie brands are very much loved and hyped up, not just because they are innovators and they do special things that you will not find very easily anywhere else, but also because they are just a way in for a lot of creators to get their name out there and to be more successful as a creator on a lot of platforms. So I think that those are like the two main reasons why indie brands are so loved and hyped up over here, but also on other channels. Like I mentioned, they're a bit more unique very often, not all the time. We'll get to that in a minute. And they're hyped up because if you're a smaller creator, it's just so much easier to be able to do something with. But of course you then do need to find them. And I think that in order to really understand the whole indie brand game, I think we also need to dig into some history here. So back in the day when I started my blog and I was more so into reading blogs, and YouTube beauty community wasn't a huge thing yet, sort of what you saw happening is that because of social media, people were looking for other things. You didn't just want to use that new MAC product. Like MAC was the be all and end all of all things makeup, like more than a decade ago when I first got into makeup. So there was this focus on like bigger name brands. Like MAC had like this certain status of, ooh, look at this. I remember back in the day, I thought makeup had to be pretty expensive for it to be good. So my first makeup was like by Dior and stuff. And we were just much more dependent on what you could find in a department store rather, or like at a makeup counter, rather than what you would buy online. So things have definitely changed and shifted in terms of what the beauty industry is like right now, which also enables indie makeup to make more waves, I think. So that's what things used to be like. And then I remember that brands like Sigma and Makeup Geek started to get a lot of traction. Both Sigma and Makeup Geek started out as dupe brands. Sigma was duping MAC brushes, and Makeup Geek was duping MAC eyeshadow because MAC was expensive, and here were brands who were saying we can do it for cheaper. Now at the time we also had Coastal Scents, and Coastal Scents is pretty important in this story as well, where we got these really big 88 color palettes that instantly gave you a lot of shades to play with, and then you very often had some more expensive things on the side. I didn't have Coastal Scents, but I had another one that I got through some website. One with 120 colors and one with like neutral colors, and I felt I, had everything for a starting makeup kit for sure. So you were much more dependent on well-established brands that were able to afford storefronts until these things started to happen. And I think definitely because of influencers and like social media, things have definitely changed. The internet has grown up. There's a lot more e-commerce going on. And this has opened up a lot of opportunities for indie brands, in my opinion. So where before you needed to have, the marketing budget and a storefront and pay rent and pay people to do the work for you, I think about a decade ago or so, suddenly, if you can build a website using WordPress, you can set up your own e-store. So what you started seeing is that people were starting to make their own nail polish. I remember I bought some indie polish quite some time ago. And then you also see that people start using that sort of vibe for like homemade makeup. And that's where a lot of brands, indie brands, and I think when people think of indie brands, where that comes from. You make it in your kitchen, you hand press it. A brand like Shroud, but also Cleona, and I think Sydney Grace as well. They all started just doing it at home in their attic or their kitchen or wherever, and they have grown their business and they get like new premises and they get employees, and it becomes this whole thing. So I think that for a lot of people, when it comes to indie makeup, they think of indie makeup as being something like homemade, hand-pressed, this really special thing, especially because indie brands, as I already mentioned, tend to be the innovators, the things that, first it starts at an indie brand, and then a bigger brand will copy it, and all of a sudden we see it everywhere. That's how it used to go for years. And this is where we're going to get into why I think indie brands are starting to lose their luster for me. Now, hear me out. Hear me out. So the thing that doesn't make indie brands all that great comes from the fact that everyone can start an e-store. At the moment, a lot of the indie brands that are launched are not homemade. There are only a few factories in the world that produce makeup. If you have the money, you can go to one of those manufacturers and you can start your own makeup brand. And there are quite a few brands that are either still around or that are no longer around, that either have been accused of or labeled as, or that we know for sure are doing what is known as private labeling. I'll make sure, if I can find it, I'll make sure to link a video down below. I had never heard of this before, but a couple of years ago there was a creator on here called Stephanie Nicole, and she mentioned she had some inside information on the beauty industry, and she first explained this about Morphe. Morphe definitely started out as this. There is another brand called Crown Brushes, and what Crown does is that you can buy their product and pay them extra to put your name on it. Now, it really depends on the manufacturer, what options you have, whatever budget you have, whether you buy their color stories and just sell them with your name on it, or whether you get some say in how the color story is organized, whether you have any say in the formulation. Those are all like tiers in the process, you could say. But nowadays, what I see happening a lot with these new indie brands is that they're private labeled, as in they are bought from other manufacturers. They don't make the products themselves. They buy the formulas from one manufacturer, they buy the packaging from another manufacturer, and that's what they're selling as makeup to us as consumers. That's private labeling. Now, I remember when Stephanie Nicole did this video and revealed this about Morphe, and this is also why I mentioned Coastal Scents, because Coastal Scents work the same way, because I couldn't buy Coastal Scents because it was really expensive to get it shipped over. So I had Coastal Scents like palettes. It looked, on the Coastal Scent website, you could see that that palette existed with the label Coastal Scents on it, but I had it from another brand. And this is why it can sometimes happen, and this has happened in the past, where you can find a palette on Amazon for $50 and you can find the exact same one on AliExpress for $5. So this is why you sometimes need to do a bit of research. Now, a lot of the indie brands that I feature are people that do put a little bit more effort into it. It's not like I bought this thing and this was made by manufacturer A and I'm selling it as B. It's not that clear cut, but you do see that people who have the money, who can put the money up front to be buying product and then branding it with their brand, that's what a lot of indie makeup nowadays is going towards. It's no longer handmade, hand-pressed. There are a couple of brands that do everything themselves, and they also show this on their Instagram. I love like videos of like pressing shadows. Menagerie does that. Lethal Cosmetics does it. Cleona does it. I believe Glaminatrix had a video up as well of how they mix their eyeshadows. I love watching those kind of videos. And then you know that these things are made by the brand themselves. But there are quite a few brands where you just know that these are formulas that were bought and then like they put their own branding on, their own packaging, and then that's it. As I mentioned, there's a very big difference between just buying something and slapping your name on it, which is what Morphe used to do, or whether they actually have some input on what the color story and the pans, etc. looks like. So I actually have some palettes lying next to me, and one brand that I'm pretty sure does this is Odin's Eye. When these arrive, they are sealed, in a sealed off thing. That's very often a sign that they're not made on location by the brand itself, but that's something that usually means they're made in like China, they were shipped over and then shipped on again. Again, this brand definitely does have a little bit more say in what their color stories are like, because they do have some more unique color stories, but it's obvious to me at least that they buy them from a different manufacturer, for sure. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong. But if you have tried several different indie brands and you felt like, but I bought from brand A and brand B and the formula seems the same, that's probably because they were bought or produced at the same factory. And these brands have just picked colors, or maybe there was a bit more of a creative process there and they created the colors themselves and had this factory make it, and that's why some brands are now starting to feel like it's all the same thing. So this really sort of creamy shimmer formula, I'm suspecting that's made in the same factory, and there's a lot of indie brands that have that. So I think that that's one of the main reasons why some people can be felt let down when they buy indie shadows, especially if, you know, with indie brands, it can be quite expensive to buy because they are smaller retailers. They don't have the power of like a larger retailer to be sold in every single continent. They very often don't have the power to create a deal with like a postal service or anything like that. So you're gonna have to ship by weight and you're gonna have to pay for that, plus your shipping fee and your customs if it's from a different territory than where you live. And that's very often the case because a lot of these indie brands are located in the US, so they're very hyped up. And then if you're in Europe, you have to pay quite a bit there. So I think that also factors into it, that, you know, you see some people like hyping up these indie brands. And like, would you also hype it up if you had to pay 50 euros in shipping? Because for instance, for Menagerie, I have to pay about as much for the shipping and handling fees as I have to pay for the actual palette. So if that pretty much doubles the price point of the palette, so instead of 45, it's $90, would you still find that worth it? I think that that also goes into it for why people can be feeling a bit let down by some indie brands. I just think it does. And that brings me to another point where I feel that some people can feel like they're being let down by an indie brand. Because these are smaller businesses, they just don't have the kind of customer service that a lot of other brands might have. I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to film this video is the backlash that I saw on Odin's Eye Instagram when they announced that these were no longer going to be available. Is this upside down? It's upside down. So yeah, these sold out in the second restock. So they had announced this as being limited edition. The first order sold out. They opened a pre-order, and initially in their communication they had said that these would be around until Christmas. And then by the time they got ready to ship the pre-order, it had already sold out. Limited edition means that the brand has only bought so many units, and that's what they're gonna sell on. And so many people were like angry, like, why are you not gonna do another one or whatever? If they are, like I suspect, buying this from a factory directly to have it shipped to their distribution centers and then distribute it to their customers, so as in the owners of the brand don't make these shadows themselves, then they have a contractual agreement with a factory saying this is how many units we need you to make. If they now have to ask, because of popular demand, for this factory to make more, that is not going to be a very wise business decision. Another reason why the fact that these brands are so small can be a setback to them isn't just customer service and communication and like these kind of mishaps. It's also that because if they are buying these products from a factory, they very often need to put the money up front, which if this is the case in this collection, it could very well be that they paid for so many pallets and then that's it. That's all you're gonna get. And you know, they don't have really large investment firms who can then like give them extra money or whatever. And this is why a lot of brands, like for instance Glaminatrix and also Adept, I think, they tend to work with, not Adept, there's a couple of brands that do pre-orders. That's the point I'm trying to make. So instead of saying this is the release date, they'll say this is when we open the pre-order. They already get some money in, making sure that they have the units ready to be sold, shipped maybe 2 months later, because that's when the actual production process starts. So that they're not stuck with extra stock that they can no longer sell or whatever, because that's just a much bigger risk for these smaller brands. And I think that especially with how much hype some indie brands have been getting, there is this influx of customers who are not used to how indie brands just need to operate in order to be able to keep going. Like if you're a one-woman show and you're making eyeshadow by hand, this is what happened with, you know, It's Freaking Bats and Shroud. They had completely underestimated how many people wanted that palette with Betty Bean. And then what happened, people got angry that they didn't get their palette until 6 months later. I was like, I'll put in the order, I'll see when it gets here, I understand. I still like my palette a lot, but so many people were so angry with the brand for not delivering quickly enough. I'm like, this girl was working as hard as she could, and so many people were so upset. And that also brings me back to my earlier point about customer services. If these are really small companies, they don't have a team of customer service employees to help them out with answering emails or, you know, posting things on social media, etc., etc. And then I think things can just fall behind. Some of the indie brand owners have also been accused of taking things too personally. I'm like, to some people, these products are their babies. and then you go on and criticize it, you know, how would you feel about that if it was something you created and people are giving you a lot of flack for sometimes very little reason? And so there's customers who just have so many demands, like they want to buy it and within a day it needs to be on their doorstep. One thing you need to understand when you do look into shopping from indie brands, it's not going to be like Sephora. They won't have expedited next day shipping. You won't be able to go to a store to try it first. Those are all things that if that's the kind of shopping you're used to, and you're, for instance, used to going into Sephora and returning your palette and getting your money back, then yes, I understand that if you don't get your money back from an indie brand when you return it and you have to pay for the shipping to return it to, that all has to do with the fact that these brands don't have any contracts with postal services to have you, return it for free. So yeah, then you do need to pay again for shipping if you do want to return it. And how are they going to deal with, you receiving cracked shadows? I had 2 eyeshadows in my Fall Magic palette from Unearthly come cracked. So I got in touch with them and they did refund me for the 2 cracked shadows, and I had to repress them myself. So you're just going to get different customer service than what you're used to from a Sephora or like other brands that may have a lot more assets and that may have a lot more going for them. So, and this brings me to the final bit of this video. So I want to talk about like the limitations of shopping from indie brands and what as a consumer you just need to be very aware of so that you can make the process as seamless for yourself as possible. Some of it is definitely on the brand. Some of it is definitely the brand's fault. But there's definitely also things that you as a consumer can do in order to just make it much more pleasant for yourself. So first of all, I would always, especially if it's indie brands, I always wait for reviews. I haven't tried many indie brands myself, like without having heard of them from other people first. I'm not an early adapter that way, and it's just because I don't want to waste my money. So for instance, a new brand I'm going to be trying is this one. This is Gloss Gods. They're a Swedish indie brand, and I had heard of them before, but then I saw a Dutch creator using it in one of her videos, and I was like, oh yeah, that's another brand I wanted to try. And then I had a look at them, and then it wasn't that expensive, so I was like, might as well try that. So I think that you would have to go for reviews first. Look for reviews, look for swatches. Don't get sucked into the hype, especially with indie brands. The marketing can be quite aggressive. I mean, again, the other day I had this entire timeline takeover from Ace Beauté palettes from some creators. I have already mentioned before how I greatly dislike that. And a lot of indie brands do it that way. So don't fall for the hype. Don't buy things upon release unless you know it's a brand you've shopped from before and it's a brand you can trust. If you don't trust it, don't buy from it. That's the be all and end all. Right, so the camera angle has probably changed, but I had to change my battery and I'm losing light by the minute. So I hope I can finish video before you can no longer see me. But yeah, the second point I wanted to make is that when you find an indie brand that you're interested in, before you buy from them, start following them on Instagram and sign up to their newsletters. Their official websites I usually find very unreliable when it comes to like news on like restocks or when they will have new products out. All of that is on Instagram. So if you don't have an Instagram account, I'm terribly sorry, but follow a couple of your favorite brands and sign up to their newsletter. I find that Instagram is usually the better way to do it. That's where all the information really is. So that's step number 2. So look for reviews, sign up to Instagram and newsletters, because that's how you're gonna stay up to date. Thirdly, when you decide to buy, not all websites will do this, but what I sometimes like to do is that I, for instance, make a Word document where I already post all of the links to the products if I know there's going to be a big restock. And if the website does have an option to create a wish list or to already save things in your cart, then very often that's what I will do, especially if it's like a restock kind of thing. Also make sure that you check how much shipping and handling fees are in advance. What's the threshold to receive free shipping? Is it still going to be within the limits of, you know, what you can actually import into the EU, or the other way around if you're in another part of the world? Those are all things you already need to take into account. And I do think when it comes to shipping fees, it's gotten a little easier, at least where I live. I'm not sure it's the same everywhere, but I now can get a notification per email and I can just pay for the custom fees online, and it's just going to be delivered to my doorstep. So that makes it a little bit more seamless. I think we've had that for about a year and a half now, and I really like that kind of system. I no longer have to first go to the post office and then pay and then they ship. It's like, it's a little bit more seamless. So yeah, when it comes to, you know, those shipping and handling fees, sometimes you're just going to have to pay for them. This is why I very often wait for restocks, or whenever, you know, the brand will have the most in stock at a given time. And this is why I've essentially stopped shopping for Menagerie, because they're now just restocking as they go along, and they no longer do a full restock, which for an international shopper is not that great. Very often when you buy from a company and they have to ship by weight, getting one product or two doesn't make a whole lot of difference in terms of shipping. So that's why I will very often buy 2 products, or at least try to get more. This is what I do with ColourPop as well, because it's just, you know, easier that way, and you can sort of tone down the shipping fees. Because if you already know you're going to buy 2 palettes, buying them in 2 separate instances is going to be more money than buying both of them at the same time, usually. So yeah, that's something that you you need to bear in mind as well. So the third point here is definitely about the shipping and handling fees. Look into it yourself. Know that if something is not from the continent where you live, you're gonna probably have to pay custom fees. You're lucky if you don't. Some brands will allow you to calculate it at checkout. I would always recommend you do that if you have the possibility to do so, because you take out the middleman and you don't have to pay for the like the service fee of your local customs office if the brand does it for you. Very often. Sometimes it goes wrong. But yeah, very often that's, you know, if they disclose it well enough on the packaging, you don't get a double fee for sure. And then the fourth thing you need to bear in mind is that your customer experience is just going to be different from buying from a bigger brand. And very often, actually, I have had much better experiences with customer service from indie brands than I have had with bigger brand retailers. So yeah, sure, you may have to wait 6 months for a product to come to you, but when it's there, very often they just want to make their customers happy. Of course, there are going to be people who leave snarky comments, or who can be a bit mean on Instagram to people who ask questions there. So if you have questions for the brand, or if your item comes broken, look into the appropriate ways to get in touch with the brand. Very often that's an email address, which is going to be in your email notification. So use that for questions about the product you received. Don't just leave a comment on someone's Instagram and then expect them to help you, because that's not going to work. They're probably going to need an order number. They're going to need your address. They're going to need information to be able to help you. And I very often see that people think that if they just DM a brand on Instagram, that's customer service. It's not. Instagram is not a customer service platform unless a brand specifies that it is. It's very often just a promotional tool. So don't just slide into someone's DMs and then expect them to help you if they also have an email address that's literally like help@brandname.com. Just email customer services and then you should be able to get that done. And just be prepared to wait. I mean, I waited, close to 2 months to receive my Glaminatrix stuff. When I shop from places like Adept or Aether, or like, what are some other brands I shopped from this year that took some time to get to me? It's just gonna take a while, because if things need to be shipped halfway across the world, and for some reason for some reason, if I try to get something from the United States, I know it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks. I can use the tracking, and then I can see something going from Texas to LA, then New Jersey, before it is even shipped to Europe. And then it arrives in Germany, and then it is sent to the Netherlands, and then it is sent to my house. So very often what you'll see is that, especially in the United States, if people use US Postal Services, the package is gonna bounce around from different locations that also the sender, the brand, has no control over, because that's just the way the logistics of the US Postal Services work. Whereas, for instance, if you order it from China, for some reason they can get it here for in a week's time. If you buy something from Kaleidos, they have super duper prompt shipping for sure. But that's because there are different shipping rules and also shipping fees attached to anything shipped from China directly. So in case you didn't know, China has some sort of deal, which is why you pay for so little if you buy something from China compared to the United States. That's just an international agreement that we collectively pay less for brands that ship from China. So that's another thing you need to just bear in mind. I mean, I've done this myself where I have shipped, giveaway prizes to international viewers, and I also pay 25 euros in shipping if I ship it to someone in the US, and it's just one pallet. So that's just the way postal services work. That's, it's not something to get angry about. If you don't want to spend that kind of money, stick to Sephora, Ulta, Cult Beauty, Douglas, whatever your biggest beauty retailer is. Stick to those if you don't want to wait and pay extra. And if you expect a reply from customer services within an hour, that's usually not the case with indie brands. Just patience. Patience is key. And if you didn't know yet, just be aware that there's quite a lot of indie brands out there right now that don't make their shadows themselves, that order the shadows and the packaging from manufacturers and they assemble it, or maybe not even that. They may just, order it as is. That's the makeup you receive. I mean, I heard an MUA on TikTok say this, lip liners. There's only 3 manufacturers of lip liners in the world, which is why it really doesn't matter what kind of lip liner you buy from what brand, because they're all essentially the same. And I feel that that's a similar thing with eyeshadow, and especially with indie brands. You can sometimes find the ingredient list on the back, and very often it's just the way, the typeset of the ingredient list, the way that's organized. I have noticed that it's the same across several brands, which just has me expect that they're all from the same manufacturer at least, if not something that the manufacturer says, this is what we can deliver, and the brand just says, I want that, and that, and this is what I want the packaging to look like, and that's what gets made, and that's what's shipped out to you. So if you find that worth it, definitely be aware of that. This is also why I love following indie brands on Instagram, because the ones that do run the entire operation themselves have a lot of behind the scenes footage of that. So I always appreciate that. And I'm not sure whether I've covered everything now. I think I did. So yeah, when it comes to indie brands, there's just a bit of history behind it. It's not all gonna be handmade. Not all of it is going to be super unique anymore, I feel, because we are just getting this oversaturation of indie brands now. And it's not all super unique, which is why I don't want to buy every single one. But yeah, if they do something nice and I really enjoy it, I will buy more of it. I always keep an eye out to try some new brands every single year. Many of them indie brands, not all of them though, but yeah, there's always a couple of brands I want to try that are just new to me, and then indie brands are definitely part of that. But I tend to pick and choose, and I don't just buy every indie brand just because it's an indie brand and it's new, which is what you see some other channels do. So that's just where I'm coming from here. I hope this video was helpful, or maybe you learned something in the process, who knows. And now I'm going to be closing off this video because I am getting very low on lighting today. It's November when I'm filming this. So yeah, it's that time of the year, right? We're getting into the dark days before Christmas. I can't wait. I love Christmas period. So yeah, I have a lot more coming your way as well. There's a lot of other content that I have planned out, including some favorite videos, of course, towards the end of the year. So if you want to know my ultimate favorites of the year, then stay tuned for that. And of course, I'm going to be doing a palette review, and I'm going to do some lipstick swatches, and I'm going to do all the lovely good things. So I really hope you would like to stay tuned for that, and I hope to see you in my next video. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.